Hey, Jared here. And the question today is, why can't I stop eating? Someone just asked this question. Why can't I stop eating? They were at an Overeaters Anonymous meeting in San Jose area. I was just there, and there was a certain pain in their voice that had come from working the program of Overeaters Anonymous and still having the question, why can't I stop eating? Why am I a food addict? I have been working these 12 steps, surrendering my power, working with people. Why can't I stop eating? I feel like a food addict. This person says they've calmed down, they've made progress, they realize that their binge eating is related to the rage they have at certain things. They feel like they've grown a lot, but they also say they can't stop eating. And so I want to explain to you in this post what is a blueprint for you so you can understand the core underlying reason you can't stop eating, why you can't stop eating. I'm going to give you a blueprint. It's based on the binge eating cycle. And I'm going to list common blind spots, pseudo dieting things. Basically, you're probably dieting, even though you might not think you're dieting. And dieting leads to binging. Restriction leads to binging. And I'm also going to give you a step-by-step exercise so that you can identify and uproot these food rules that are probably keeping you in overeating cycles that you just aren't really aware about. So I can relate because I was a wrestler. I remember back in the day, I would wrestle and go to these tournaments, and then I'd lose weight, 10 pounds during the week, and I'd gain it all back by Monday after the tournament, feel horrible. Then I have to lose another 10 pounds and by Friday, and then cycle repeated. And there was, even when I became a monk, I was so unhappy. I became a monk, and I was a monk in California at Tassajara. And if you've ever heard of Tassajara, like the Tassajara bread book, then you know that Tassajara actually has really, really good food. And when I first started Tassajara after college, I would binge eat all the time at Tassajara, actually. I would work 4 days, and then the fifth day I had off. So it wasn't like your normal week. They have a modified week there. Normally you work 5 days and you have 2 days off. This was work 4 days, have 1 day off. And I would be restricting myself during those 4 days. I'd be quote unquote good. But on the fifth day, I would gorge like a starving hyena, stuff my face full of food. They had such good food there. I can still remember it. Tassajara is known for giving these bag lunches. And oh man, it's such a good meal. Just whole table spreads of cheese and pastas and like all the best spreads. Like you get bread, all these different fresh breads with, I don't mean to make you hungry, but this is what I was coming up against every fifth day. I'd be trying to be good. And then I'd actually have the fifth day off where I didn't have to work. And I would just get as much food as I could, bring it to my room, wolf it down. I'd be hella full, and I go to bed. I would go to sleep after that because I was really tired. But I'd wake up feeling like wanted to vomit, felt really guilty. Hiding just always brings out shame. And and long story short, I got some help. I was talking to someone there who had some familiarity with these patterns, and they showed me a version of this diagram. And this diagram literally changed my life because I could finally understand why I was binge eating. And this is my answer to that person at the Overeaters Anonymous group. Why can't you stop eating? I can hear the desperation in their voice. And that desperation is partly because they're probably trying to find one reason why they're overeating. And the fact is that overeating and binge eating, it's a cycle, and there's about 3, depending on the model, but at least in this diagram, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps. And you could screw up on either of these steps. That was my understanding. I finally could see, that was my epiphany, realizing like there was a system, there were steps and behaviors that I was doing that was leading to my binge eating. So instead of just seeing binge eating as an isolated incident, I could backtrack and put together the puzzle pieces and study my behavior. It's changed my life because I was in the monastery, really good conditions for me to study my behavior. And that's one of the core reasons how I help people nowadays, is studying behavior, like having the student's mind, an open mind. In Zen, we like to say having a beginner's mind. It's one of the most famous Zen books, is having a beginner's mind. Zen mind, beginner's mind. So we want to be able to look at our binge eating from a beginner's mind, seeing all the different pieces. Because sometimes, like this person at the Overeaters Anonymous group, they know something isn't working. It's like they are trying to water a plant with a hose, but no water is coming out of the hose. Just no water is coming out of the hose. So we know there's a kink in the hose, right? If everything else is working and there's no water coming out of the hose must be bent somewhere. Somewhere it's misaligned. Somewhere there's energy is not flowing properly. And what we don't know is how many kinks there are. We just know there's a one kink, at least. How this relates is because when we have a model to look at our binge eating, we can identify the kinks. Sometimes people are leaving it up to guesswork. They're saying, okay, I know my rage, like this person, they said their rage. They said, I know my rage is related to binge eating. So I stopped the raging, or, they got a better control of it. But then they were still stuck. They didn't have the model, the understanding to find the other kinks in their hose, so to speak. This person might have another kink in restriction. They might have another kink in food rules or cravings, deprivation, emotional eating. There's a bunch of other kinks that this person might not be aware of. So this model right here really is good to help you understand why you can't stop eating, why you feel like you're a food addict, is because you have to address all the elements in this model before you can finally really make sustained progress on your binge eating. So back to your original point, why can't you stop binge eating? Well, there's limiting beliefs, right? So after you have this model, after you can see about restriction and deprivation and cravings and so forth, you're going to be able, I want to just tell you a few rules, a few mindsets that people tend to not see reality correctly. So the most tongue-tied here, but the most prevalent example, a really big example, is the world is flat, right? So we know the world is round. And back in the day, people thought the world was flat. So if you tried to sail around the world based on your model of reality, you wouldn't get very far. You'd somehow wash up on the shore. So I wanted to give some practical examples for each of these bullet points and how people see reality wrongly. And once you see through these beliefs, once you see through these patterns, then you can really make some changes. Like Paulina, if you go to the success story page on this website, weightlossenlightenment.com, she tells you about 5 of different mindsets she had, especially around guilt. Normally people, after they binge eat, they feel guilty. That's what normally people do, right? That's the mental model most people have. But guilt is not the right way of seeing reality. You have to have a student's mind. You have to have a student. You have to be saying, okay, I just binged ate. Why did I do that? What kink in the hose was I off on? You have to reflect. So guilt, oftentimes people say, God, I'm worthless. I can't do this. And the problem there is there's no insight. There's no learning. So if you see binge eating as part of you, as something you do, as something that's part of your identity, then you're not going to change. It's an incorrect view of reality. But if you see binge eating as a pattern that you can overcome, a pattern that you can study, that's the right view. And you're going to be able to change your behavior after that. Other views in restriction, you might see that limiting your calories to lose weight or dieting is good. But this is actually really the quickest way so that you'll temporarily lose weight, just regain the weight and feel terrible about yourself. Or in food rules, you might think of food as either good or bad, like a donut or cookies, or giving the stereotypical bad examples, right? And so you have this food rule: I won't eat donuts or cookies. But that food rule is perfectionistic. It's black and white. And life isn't black and white. It's not a good way of viewing reality. A better way would be allowing yourself to have some cookies somewhere, sometime. Having a few cookies every now and then, a more balanced approach. When you just have rigid food rules, you end up feeling like a failure because you can't live up to them. It's not a good way to view reality. You end up feeling like a failure, you end up binge eating. Deprivation happens basically when you try to avoid, quote unquote, these bad foods. You try to avoid it, and you can for a day or two, but trying to avoid these bad foods, give in eventually. It's just not a good way to approach healthy eating. Yeah, I know your intention is right, where you're trying to avoid those bad foods because someone told you they were unhealthy, and that's the straightforward answer. But this is a food rule that is actually a kink. You actually need to let yourself have some of these bad foods so you realize they're not special, that these foods are just normal. You actually don't want them. And cravings, right? So many people try to beat their cravings with willpower, but that doesn't work. You know, when you have a craving and you just turn your back to it, you're trying to use willpower. You're saying basically to your mind, stop thinking about this particular food. Never works. And then lastly, binge eating. Again, it might seem like you're ashamed. It might seem like when you're ashamed of your binge eating that you deserve it, that things are hopeless, that this is a confirmation. Oftentimes when people start making progress on the journey to binge eating and then they binge eat again, you might think, oh, I'm a failure. Like I can't, like let's say you start this progress. Let's say you somehow start on this journey to becoming an intuitive eater and you make some progress, but then you binge eat. And then your thought is shame. You say to yourself, I can't become an intuitive eater. That's not a good view of reality. It's not even correct either. You can become an intuitive eater. But a more balanced perspective is seeing that you're going to binge eat some days, and it's going to take time, a couple weeks, a couple months, to really reduce the frequency of that binge eating. And now, lastly, I wanted to just kind of wrap up with a practical exercise to identify these unconscious food rules. Food rules are given to you by the media, by your parents, by all around the world. We're given food rules. So most of the time they're unconscious, and that means we need to bring consciousness. We need to shine the light, consciousness, to see your food rules. Because what happens is when these food rules are rigid and controlling, we end up restricting. Restricting sets off that whole cycle. So here are some examples of food rules, like where you can't eat a snack because you just ate breakfast an hour ago. That's a diet mentality thought. Or you have earned this food after the gym. That's also not a very good thought. That was my air conditioner in the background, if you can hear that. I have a little heater in my room. Anyways, you really should only eat real food. These are all like rules, and they seem good. I can eat a sandwich for lunch because I had only toast for breakfast. See how these are like rules or logical thought patterns? You can't eat past 6 p.m. or, you can only eat snacks that are a certain amount of calories. These are food rules you need to identify, because these food rules are actually what are setting you up for failure. Seriously. you can't, you basically, food rules are great, but you need to have guidelines. A food rule um, is inflexible. It doesn't lead to you um, tuning into your body. And that's what intuitive eating is all about. These food rules are like ways of controlling your body. Instead of, for example, listening to your hunger, you have this little rule that you'll just eat a snack that's X amount of calories. That rule is basically putting your hunger in your body in a handcuff, and your body is going to rebel. This is the cycle you need to see. If you can't stop binge eating, you need to get in and really dive into this cycle, because the consequences of binge eating are, they're bad. That feeling of control, lack of control, is holding you back. It's holding you back. And I know there's a tendency to just want this magical solution. Why can't I stop binge eating? As if it came down to one thing. But the fact is that there are really 6 factors that um, 6 kinks in the hose, so to speak, that you might be having. And again, I don't know what you're having. You could just have one of these kinks. You could have all 6. All we know right now is that there's a kink in the hose because you're binge eating. And we have to explore these. You can journal, you can study. Right here, these beliefs are really around this is how people improperly view restriction and dieting. These are improper ways of relating and thinking about dieting and restricting. There's other improper beliefs that people have around cravings. The biggest one around cravings is that they can't handle it. They don't know what to do about it. It's too painful. Things like that. These are incorrect ways of viewing reality. So you have to identify the kink, and then do some journaling, do some introspection, schedule the strategy call with me if you're really having a hard time with this. It's at weightlossenlightenment.com/free strategy session. I'll help you get to the root of some of these like stumbling blocks, help you identify them. And then you get your thoughts out on paper, and you take a more balanced perspective. You dig into them. So like another one is paying penance for bad foods. So let's say you eat some bad foods and then you quote unquote pay penance, or you compensate. It's a signature. It's a very common behavior. We've all heard of bulimia. This is when in extreme forms, this is bulimia, the compensation of it. And so what this means is basically you're saying to yourself, you are a bad person because you ate bad. You're a bad person. Now you need to have a penance, right? You need to compensate in order to be a good person. You have to really dig deep, because this goes down to the identity level. And then once you see how silly that is, how freaking silly is that? You had some bagels at work. You had too many bagels or something, or a donut, and your self-worth is on the line. Once you examine and shine the light onto your beliefs, you clearly can shed these beliefs. And then you can take a more balanced perspective at work. Instead of saying, I ate too many bagels at work and now I'm a bad person, you can say something like, I had some bagels yesterday, I was stressed out and it was actually a weird day. I do feel like I screwed up. That's my conditioning. But I also know that I'm much more than having a bagel. I'm much more than a day in my life, a bad day of eating my life. And I'm okay as a person. And that kind of switch gives you freedom to choose whether or not you want to have a penance behavior. So I hope this helps. Subscribe to the Weight Loss Enlightenment podcast, or share this episode if you found it useful. Thank you so much for tuning in.